So, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for our artist talk with Weshoyot Alvitre. And she is one of the artists in the Front Our Ancestors' Dream.
Thank you for having me. Hello, everybody. My name is Weshoyot Alvitre. I'm from the Tongva tribe, and our traditional homelands are Los Angeles Basin. And I was invited to participate in this group show with several other artists, and I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to share some of my work that relates to the tribal people from the land that the gallery is on. So who am I? I am Tongva, I am Scottish. I am from the blood of imprisoned Spanish soldiers. I am blood from the menses of Indian women. I am made of medicine from the islands. I am formed of dirt from the original people. I am divots from pecked rock mazes. I am ochre, I am effigy. I am from the colonizer that became the seeds of the survivor. I am here because of all who came before me. Their stories are in my veins, their voices echo in my head. This is why I make art. So I am primarily a comic book artist, sequential artist, and illustrator. I'm also a writer. And I'm going to be sharing some work tonight that relates to sort of me exploring my identity, who I am, and the things that connect me to the land and the homelands that I was raised on, as well as the surrounding lands of Southern California. So my name, Weshoyot, means 2 stars. It's in our language, the Tongva language, which was deemed extinct in the turn of the century in 1900. It wasn't actually extinct. There were actually surviving living speakers up until about, I believe, the 1940s. It was recorded by J.P. Harrington on wax cylinder recordings in anticipation of it becoming an extinct language, but our tribal members are trying to revitalize the language and relearn how to speak our traditional language. To love your name. 2 stars are what I was named after 2 lineages, 2 bloodlines, 2 hearts, 2 lands, divisive. From birth to school, I was a child. A twinkle, bright, free, without limits. Then school and darkness, like the night I was born, straight down the middle of pitch black with equal parts darkness before and darkness after. Midnight was the center, 2 shooting stars, my name. I was the bright one, surrounded by emptiness. Others, faint glimmers in the night sky of my life. Always alone, yet always traveling. Don't let me burn up as I enter their atmosphere. A name is what you make it. It is given to you as a gift. My name was something I had to learn. I'm still learning. Only through years of repetition. Don't forget your language. Of mispronunciation. Don't let adversity deflect you. Of mixed reactions. Don't let outsiders form who you are through their own insecurities. Don't let them take it away. The weight of a mantra that took years to gain its magic. It's a long name, and it was placed upon me at birth, like an heirloom robe, heavy and ingrained, with the scent and ceremony of the ancestors who wove stories in its work, who sewed it with spit on sinew from their mouths, prayers silent through their careful repetition of weave. It's taken me years to love the weight of a name placed on my back, like a burden since birth. A burden of precious memories, a tired soul born again. To keep and tend to the mysteries and gifts in that sacred bundle. It's taken me years to love the person whom this name is shaped before. She was ready and open to be formed with angular joints and dark, dark eyes. To love a name, to love the magic on the tongue when that lost language is spoken, every time in greeting, in recognition, a mantra to never forget who you are, who you were, who you will be, and who you love. So my name reclaimed our language, just as the name Tongva reclaimed our identity from Spanish terms for our people. My dad laid pathways for me to pick up and to follow after having to search on his own through gatekeepers and academic vaults who kept our language, our items, our songs, and our ancestors out of our hands. My grandpa fought for what he believed in and gave our family the strength in who we are and what we are capable of as survivors of genocide and resistors of assimilation. My grandfather grew up in a time when being Indian could mean you didn't live to the next day. And so the families from about 1900 up until about the 1950s really tried to assimilate and not talk about being Native in any way, shape, or form. It was deemed sort of the lowest on the social hierarchy. And so what they tried to do is they tried to get good paying jobs and sort of fit into the American dream. And so a lot of the things that he was taught from his own father, he kept sort of in secret. And it wasn't until little things would slip out and my dad and my aunt and my uncle kind of started asking him a little bit more and a little bit more, and he kind of revealed more and more until he was sort of on his deathbed. And that was when he really sort of opened up and talked about a lot of the things that he had kept secret his entire life. So I owe, growing up in the way that I was raised, a huge debt of gratitude to my dad for asking those questions of his father, and also reaching out and seeking these informations through our language, through what has been written about us in any way that he could. He was a person of color, and so he was kept out of being able to afford higher education. And so all these places that had academic papers on our people, he didn't have access to them. He didn't have access to the wax cylinder recordings at the Smithsonian, because you need a degree or credentials in order to request these things. And so much of the work that I do now is in deep respect to my dad and to my grandfather. Our traditional homelands are Hollywood, LA, Pasadena, Long Beach. This is a picture of Hollywood land, which was traditional Tongva territory. There's actually a well-known village near this hill, and it was named after the hill. It's the place of the hill. Terms in Southern California like Coenga, Topanga, Azusa, those are all taken from our language. And the cities that exist now are sort of bastardizations of our traditional village names for the sites. So some of the work that I do is taking these things and shedding light and trying to educate people on the spaces that they reside on. So this was a digitally manipulated piece of artwork, and I kept it digital because I didn't want to go in and cause any harm to the land in putting up a physical sign or anything. This was done in 2019. And it was really just to bring awareness that the place where so many people have dreams of going and becoming famous is traditional tribal territory, and it's unceded tribal territory. The same goes with Disneyland, which is in Anaheim on the Santa Ana River, near the traditional village of Hotukna. This is one of our traditional homes. They're circular grass homes, and they're similar to other tribal homes across Southern California. The Chumash have houses very similar to us, as well as the Cuyas. Another piece that's relating space with traditional homelands. This is Los Cerritos wetlands, which is close to our traditional village of Mutuchegna. And this was to protect the site. They wanted to go in, build. There's a large land dispute. We're trying to keep it as open source wetlands and keep it protected, and also keep out the pollution, the oil drilling, and everything else that happens down there. Bolsa Chica is another one of our traditional village sites. It was also a very large burial site. And so this is a way that I could sort of bring awareness through my art, connect it to the land and to these sites, to let people know that this land is unceded native land, despite whatever it is that they want to build there or extract from the land. We have a very long-standing history, and our dead are buried on this land. So the city of San Pedro, it's a traditional village of Chaligna. Catalina Island is Pimugna or Pimu. San Nicolas Island, Parasagna. All these places are our traditional homelands, and so many of them have lost their traditional names. Currently, there's a poll to try to get the Northern Channel Islands changed back to their traditional Chumash names. And the Chumash tribal bands are working on, taking actions to get that happening. The Southern Channel Islands are our traditional homelands, and I really do think that they should be returned to their traditional names. This is a project that I've been working on relating to a story of a real life person. She was a medicine woman. She was the son of a chief. And she grew up right as the Spanish were sort of invading California lands and California, tribal communities, and enslaving people from various communities all the way down south from Baja, up into Kumeyaay land, up through Tongva land, Chumash, and it goes as far north as the tribes that exist up near San Francisco. So, hundreds of tribes were affected by this. And so she led a revolt without weapons to go against what they were doing. She was captured. She was also pregnant during the time of the revolt. She was imprisoned and beaten while pregnant. She managed to give birth to her son while she was imprisoned. And she got thrown to the wolves in a way, to where she was forcibly baptized, sent north, and forced to marry a Spanish soldier, away from all of her people, away from her homelands, because they didn't want her to start more trouble. And they understood that the power that she had in not only organizing, the people from her homelands against this, but what she could potentially do and the damage she could potentially do to the mission system if she were to remain in her traditional lands. So we learned from a young age to be careful with the rattlers. They can be poisonous, but they can also be medicine. My grandpa told me he used to use their bones for teethers for my father when he was an infant, the rattles he wore around his neck. The Spanish would call this a spell. They evoke fear into the hearts of their people as a means of control and power. They commit their words to paper pages bound in skins. We commit our words to memory through our language. And even a fire hotter than this could not burn down the volumes that lay within us. Our power is intangible. I realized all those buried here before had returned back to the stars. And if I fail and they sentence me to death, it's only a sentence to return home. I am nothing more than a cog in the sky. Then I realized something. For the first time, I realized I am not alone. There's something even more precious than my life at this point, something growing, a seed. My blood, pulsating with the proteins and venom plotting to kill, is the same blood flowing through my body into the tiny unborn life buried within my belly. I was given a gift to see these things come to fruition, and given a gift of valuable beads to ensure my position in carrying this out, material things to solidify intention. What I saw when I accepted these beads from Nicholas Jose should have made me stop in my tracks, though. This gift had a double meaning, 2 strands and 2 hands. While it was confidence that they trusted my role in this plan, I knew these beads would seal my fate as an accomplice and as a prisoner. I saw my own death by a soldier's hand if we proceeded differently. And in that, the death of a bloodline growing in my belly. That very first movement was a jolt. I knew if they found out who the father was, they'd try to kill me as well. My own people. And so that the only way to protect him was to accept the beads, the defeat, and find protection as a prisoner in their shackles, in their system. The only way to survive this for my people, for my land, for the future generations to even have a chance, is to slice my heart into pieces and distribute across the lands. This is how resistance will survive. So this story is based on historical fact. I've gone through and researched this for, I think, going on about 5 or 7 years now, and it continues to bring up things that haven't been seen in many, many years. The official trial transcript it was written down in mission records, and it's been translated multiple times. There's also baptismal records of her while she was at Mission San Gabriel when she was moved northward. There's baptismal records of her children being born. She ended up passing away at Mission San Juan Bautista in an unmarked grave, and far, far away from her traditional homelands and her traditional people. She was probably never given a proper burial ceremony either, which is a really, sad thing. And so my work here is to use stories, of our people that are in the history books, in the records, and build off of those with things that I know. So it's not just sort of, small summaries of whatever they could pull from mission records. The problem with mission records and doing a lot of historical work is oftentimes it's written from a very sort of white-centered point of view and perspective. And this sort of spreads across a lot of the, indigenous history within California and Southern California. So much of it's tainted with mission history and the way that they wrote about our people, which was extremely biased. They thought we were closer to animals and ignorant children than we were to actual human beings. And so a lot of this work that I'm doing is trying to rehumanize not only our people, but our stories and our culture, and educate people and provide representation, because I didn't have that growing up. So I'm hoping that my work will change that. Another piece that I did is about our sacred site, Pavugna. The site is basically where our people originated from, they came from. And it's a very special place to us. It's also located technically in or on Cal State University Long Beach, but the actual site encompasses much of the roadways and city beyond the actual campus of the university. So many people like to say, oh, it's on Cal State University Long Beach, but the village site used to support hundreds of people at the very least. And so in order to be able to do that, the village site was much larger than a lot of times people will actually discuss. And it's been victimized, it's been dug up by construction. They tried to install like a strip mall on open land. When I was a teenager, my aunt and my grandpa and my uncle fought it for many, many years. My uncle lived on the land and the property in a travel trailer for over 2 years to protect the land and to make sure people weren't taking burials and bones out of the earth. This was before Standing Rock and so many of the things that we have now where it's publicized, where people have cell phones and they photograph things and they live stream things. When this was happening, it was the early 90s. A lot of attention wasn't given to it at all. They didn't have any sort of news coverage. Nobody really cared about Indian issues. And if word got out about any of the Indian issues, they tried to sweep it under the rug because they knew that they could do so without getting news exposure. So this is sort of a piece based on that. Our creation story begins here, a circle formed from the clay, a womb, a ring forever tying us to the land, a gathering place, Pavugna. What they are doing now is mindless. Coming onto our lands, capturing our water at Rancho Los Alamitos was mindless. Building a university, a place of education, and not acknowledging our history of thousands upon thousands of years is mindless. They are without minds. Only beings without minds can be capable of such desecration. Open land is bait for development. They want to devour the flesh of our mother. They're like coyote, like eakwe, eoton, thief, ano. Imagine if time were to freeze. Imagine if Ino did not steal from Wiyot. Where would we be, as people of the earth still? White clay in our mouths and prayer. When we became like humans, we learned to build. Thatched homes of willow and tule in the style of children, of ripe womb, round and with openings at the top to connect us to the stars, to the creator, into Shinishnish. In the last months, Moya Hayayant Mukat, Weshoyot requested to be taken to healing waters which run beneath the lands and connect them like arteries. He did not speak often. His voice was scarce and husky. He was thinking hard about the groups of races of beings needed for the people to survive. He was enchanted by red-legged frog woman, Weshoyot. He watched her as she sat along the lake's edge. She refused to swim. Her long hair covered her back, but as she stood up, his lust waned. She heard his thoughts and vowed to poison him, and so she did, and Weshoyot fell ill, preparing to die. Weshoyot was frail and died in the month of Tongyilamukot, big white month, July. His people were soon summoned, and they gathered at Pulvogna. So many came to the gathering that the land could not contain them. His funeral bundle was prepared in the most careful of ways. Elderberry water washed his sparse belongings. A pole was erected high into the sky like a swing tethered to the other worlds. Patterns of the worlds above and the worlds below were made in the sand in the world that we know. White clay was used, covering the grounds like sacred snow. White clay was placed in the hair of all who attended. The sun made halos on the heads of all beings. The land shone. Smoke rose from the fire like a dragon. Eno came. He leaped. He bit. He could not reach his father's heart to steal. The flames were too much, and the people came with sticks to protect their father as he interred. Eno leapt away. His fur was scorched and covered in ash. To this day, his fur is singed from Weshoyot's funeral pyre. Today, the land is overgrown with eucalyptus, scrub oaks, and invasive weeds. Non-native plants and dried cut grass almost make us forget how beautiful it must have been, how fertile and healthy we once were, how lovely we are. The shells poke through the tired dirt, remnants and reminders that it was a sacred ground, that it is sacred ground, as it will always be. The legend of the land is often unknown, even by its own people. It's scattered and fragmented like shell midden, like our oral history, like our language, like our tribe, like our graphs on sovereignty. We remain. We are wild like the land. We will always be the earth underfoot, no matter what weight is placed on our backs, no matter what they try to build to stifle us. We will shake it off like water, like our mother does when she quakes. We are people of the earth, Tongva. The earth always returns to itself, its original state. The red ties ornament the trees, letting visitors know these are not just trees. Red ochre is hard to find these days. Cotton is not traditional, but neither are eucalyptus. We have to reclaim what we can after losing so much. The trees are like us. Our roots latch to the earth, Mother Tamayawut, to survive. We are misfits. Our DNA from across seas, nourished by a mother who does not judge our foreign bark and tree sap. We are merely children grasping to hold on to whatever life we know. The land will not let us perish. It is not that cruel. Tamayawut will not let us die. We, as mixed blood children, products of love, products of rape, seeds from Spanish stock and foreigners, are still here today, surviving despite our biodiversity being varied, mixed, half-blood, mulatto, mestizo, Indian, outside our control. Sling our hearts over and over. Across the land you mow over. Tread our bones and carelessly crush them, so carefully buried, so carelessly crushed, like shell midden. The things we treasure are not hard, long-lasting. They do not burden us like gold or other material wealth. Instead, they soften, absorb, turn to dust so we may breathe them in, so they may plant themselves in our lungs, to our blood, to our hearts. Our families are not ghosts. They're still on this land, just in different form, intangible. We will slip from your hands. The ancient ones watch and discuss in soft buzzing and gentle breezes. Our language drifts in and out of the branches like soft wings. And when they are angry, the air becomes dizzy and the ground opens and shake. The vibrations of the land then become bitter on the tongue, but tasty in that way which memories are triggered. When it gets dark and the sun's soft glow disappears from the soft earth, a presence settles on the land. What a place to behold before the light pollution stole its still demeanor and unmoving nuance. The starlight would coat the lands in the most careful hues. The moonlight would illuminate mother's curves and crevices, and the darkness would swallow us all back to another time, but the same place. Seeds would ride the warm winds and settle. Heavy acorns would fall, be nourished by their mothers and take root at their feet. Our minds and bodies, so injured over so short a time, could heal. Imagine what that could feel like. Imagine who we could return to be. I try to catch these thoughts, these small tufts of memory, floating in the thick air over Pavlovna, like seeds from our ancestors' prayers. The land is ripe, we just need to remember. The land is here, we just need to remember. That the now is the past, the present is the ever was. Prayers for Pavlovna. So that's the end of my presentation. And if you have any questions about any of the work that I do or anything that I talked about, I'm happy to entertain questions.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I personally really enjoy your work in general, but also just how you kind of mix historical into your work with modern indigenous issues. Yeah, I really enjoy all of your work and your comics.
Thanks. I think it's important for us to do work based on history because so oftentimes we were erased from that history. We weren't given, the space to talk about our versions of history. And that's a huge thing sort of in the political undercurrent now, but without us, talking about the things that happened to us and how we survived those things and how it affected us, like there can't really be any sort of healing. And I think that also it kind of helps expand people's education because the education system in this country is so limited to what they feed you. You don't have sort of a viewpoint of history outside of that. And so, I have really kind of always been interested in history, but I've found ways to sort of begin to incorporate actual historical, issues into the comic book work that I do. And I think it's really effective storytelling, but I think it also helps people understand things in a way that just writing about it, doesn't. When you have sort of pictures and words mixed together, it allows people to sort of experience it in a different way. So it's something that I love to do and will continue to do.
Yeah, I think that's maybe the part that I enjoy the most is that the visual aid. And yeah, just like you said, I think the visual aid really helps people understand exactly what you're talking about and really understand the importance of what you're talking about. If anyone else has any questions, we have one in the chat. Hector says, how do you go about explaining about Hollywood, the fact that it's stolen land?
Yeah, so the piece that I showed you, the Tongva land piece, it has brought a lot of open discussion about that by juxtapositioning, something that people are so familiar with, which is the Hollywood sort of the letters. I mean, it's on postcards, it's on shirts. Whenever you think of Hollywood, that's kind of like the mental image that comes to mind. And so, the reason for me doing that was to establish, the traditional people of the land, which are known as either Gabrielino Tongva. Those are the terms that we've used for ourselves, and sort of flip people's, I guess, idea of Hollywood on its head. And, it makes people uncomfortable because it's not just Hollywood that's stolen land, this entire country. So few spaces were actually gone through actual negotiations as a point of sale from Native people to sort of the colonizing groups. So most California lands are unceded. Most of them were never ever sold. They were never given away. They were taken. There were treaties involved. that were never ratified in this state specifically. And I think that history, a lot of people just are completely either ignorant to because they didn't learn it in school, or they don't understand that, you know, how could all of this land just sort of be taken from people? How could it not have been sold? How could they not have been compensated? So I think it's important to bring these things up and make people uncomfortable and talk about those things. Our tribe specifically is not federally recognized, and I don't think that they will ever give us federal recognition, to be honest. There's too much wealth on our traditional homelands for them to ever give reparations or ever account for the amount of oil, water, mineral, you know, values that they've extracted from our traditional homelands, as well as the retail space. Land in LA is, as you well know, it's very high priced, high ticket. It's also extremely important to industry. So the Port of Long Beach is one of the largest places where commodities are imported from international places. And that entire area in Long Beach, all the way northward, used to be places where we hunted and we fished and we lived and we relied on the health of the water. And we don't have that anymore because of colonization and pollution, and all these things that are reliant on the land now. So I don't think that they could ever give those spaces back or, you know, compensate anybody for the amount of damage and the amount that's been extracted. But people need to know those things when you say, oh, this is stolen land. I think they need to have those associations of how it impacts people. Yeah, it's stolen, but how does it affect us now? Everybody that orders anything off Amazon, it's coming into this country through the Port of Long Beach. And so you're participating. Even I order stuff on Amazon, you know, on occasion, and I'm participating in these colonial structures that exist on our traditional homelands. And so that's something that's really hard sometimes to wrap your brain around. But understanding that we're all contributing to that is, like, I think something that's very important.
I would like to say first that your work is very amazing. Your storytelling mixed with the visual aspect, like Ale was saying, it has a really well crafted hand-to-hand feel with the two, and I felt an instant connection to the part where you're speaking about the way that our land has changed and how the trees and the plants that are here now are from, you know, from different parts of the world that's not native. And I recently started to, I was starting to read a book about native plants in California, and I didn't realize that oak trees were native to California. And when I first found that out and started looking around and seeing, like how you said, a lot of eucalyptus trees, and those are the trees I saw growing up my whole life here in San Diego. And I thought it was really amazing or really sad to start to realize how much it's not just the systems and the things that we do in our everyday lives, but the plants and the land around us really has changed. And I really like that you highlighted that and made that connection in your story.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, it's so important. Like you're saying, people have this idealized version of California. Like when you think of California, it's palm trees and eucalyptus trees, and you know, a lot of this land, it used to be oak trees, and we relied on those oaks as one of the primary food sources. And that goes all the way up, you know, from beneath the, you know, the artificial border that separates California from Mexico, but all the way farther north into like Oregon. We relied on acorns, not only for our food, but we used it to tan animal hides. We used to use the oak galls and the tannins and the oak bark and stuff for that. And we also, you know, used it in our basketry. So these plants are so important to us on so many levels, you know, from sustenance through food, through you know, what we do day to day, baskets or using animal hides or even medicine was made from these things. And I think we've lost a lot of that. We've lost that relationship with our plants. So like I grew up, I was born out in Newbury Park. My dad used to run a cultural center that he started out there, but I grew up out in the middle of nowhere. And he, you know, made a point to teach me about all these plants as best that he could, what he knew. And I carry that with me everywhere I go. And it's really, it's hard for me to be in the city and to see so much cement and like construction and just things that either dig up the land or they just suffocate the plants and stuff. Or like you're saying, like have non-native species come in, and then the ramifications of what that does to not only other plants, but other species that goes all the way up the food chain into the animal life, into us. It's important to know. So I think first steps are like educating yourself, knowing, you know, what the native plants are. It's the same way, you know, whose land you're on, you know, what tribal communities came here, just show them some respect and understanding. And with that, it kind of helps you sort of recenter your perspective on your day-to-day and also your relationships with, you know, your surroundings. And that's kind of like first steps to like just kind of seeing the world in a different way.
Yeah, I think that's huge to bring that history back up to people's everyday lives, because you know we move through the world and and in the Western society we like kind of rush through the world and things kind of fly by and you don't notice your surroundings, and it's kind of built in that sense to do that. And once you kind of start looking around, you know, you really do see the scars and I think highlighting the true history and like you said, putting that perspective back into place of like where you actually are and what has happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so important to do. And I think people are doing it more so now because, you know, they see things either on social media, they're seeing how other people are responding to these places or seeing how other people can help educate them. And I think in that way, like social media is a very powerful tool. You can use it for a lot of bad stuff, but you can also use it for a lot of good. But yeah, like, but then there's like detrimental effects. Like if you popularize a place because it's a beautiful place outdoors, you run the risk of it being further desecrated for people going there, you know, to snap photos and stuff, and don't have that understanding about how sensitive the natural environment is and how much damage they could easily do to a space just by going and walking on, you know, land in a way that's not respectful. So we have a long ways to go, I think, as a culture, especially in this country. I think people want to learn and they want to do good, but you know, it's a long way trying to find methods and ways to sort of engage with people and you know, offer up maybe recommendations on how to do that. But I'm glad at least some of the work that I'm doing, like through visual art, can hopefully make people think a little bit more about the spaces that they're in and, you know, what's going on whatever lands that they occupy, especially here in Southern California.
Definitely. I think your work has definitely done that. At least in my case, it has. So yeah, thank you so much for being here, for talking to us and sharing your work. And thank you to those who joined us and those who will watch later on YouTube. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.